Most people think exercise is about discipline, weight loss, or getting stronger. But one of the fastest ways to change how you feel mentally today is simply moving your body. Not, spending 2 hours in the gym. Sometimes just 10 minutes is all that's needed there.
Yeah, this episode's not about getting shredded. It's about getting better. We're talking about the science behind why movement can improve mood, reduce anxiety, sharpen thinking, and build mental resilience, and how surprisingly little you need to start feeling the benefits. Welcome to the Mental Fitness Podcast in partnership with NUE, that's NUE, where we explore real tools and stories for building mental strength in the modern world.
Yeah, it's, we're talking about movement really as a state change tool, right? Like relative to the whole mental fitness concept and world, right? So the core idea is that movement changes your internal state, right? It can shift your mood, your energy, your stress levels, mental clarity, right? And I'm sure, I know, Dave, you've talked about this a lot, but for listeners, have you ever gone for a walk while, maybe you're stressed or you have a lot on your mind and you come back feeling completely different, right? You didn't do some strenuous exercise, but most people have experienced that. And that's not placebo, it's biology, right? So movement is one of the fastest ways to shift the nervous system. So most people, when they hear exercise, they do imagine intense workouts or spending hours at the gym. But like I said, I've heard you talk about this before, and small doses of movement can change how you feel. What have you noticed personally here or with others?
Yeah, I like exercise, but I have noticed that even just with me personally, an evening walk to clear my head or a 2-minute break to jump on the trampoline, something as simple as that actually makes a big difference. What's interesting, Winston Churchill, he famously struggled with depression, which he called his black dog, and one of his coping strategies was long daily walks, often for several miles. So one of his habits he relied on to manage his mental health, his mental state during the war was something very simple, long walks. He would often walk for miles, sometimes late at night, and he would just use that time to think and process. What's interesting is that Churchill intuitively discovered, what he discovered is exactly what the research now shows, that walking regulates stress, improves mood, and increases cognitive clarity. So supporting that, there's a large BMJ systematic review of randomized trials in 2024, and it found that exercise is an effective treatment for depression symptoms. Walking, jogging, yoga, strength training were among the most effective approaches named in the study. And there was another umbrella review that found consistent reductions in depression and anxiety symptoms across populations with physical activity interventions. And so I think the key takeaway is exercise isn't just good for our physical health, it's good for our mental health. And, for mild to moderate depression, exercise can produce improvements similar in magnitude to some traditional treatments. And so that doesn't mean it replaces therapy or medication, but it shows just how powerful movement can actually be. So, Luke, why do you think just something as simple as movement, like a daily walk or some light exercise, can have such strong effect on our mental health?
Yeah, I think the simplest answer is that movement changes your internal state, right? Not just your thoughts. So a lot of times when people feel stuck mentally, they try to think their way out of it, right? But your brain and body are connected systems. So when you move your body, you shift the whole system. Energy changes, stress levels change, your brain chemistry changes, right? So that's why something as simple as a walk, as you say, can change how you feel. That's great research, by the way. That was really cool to see how, it can help moderate depression just as much as treatment or medication and such, right? And the research shows that. But what it does in the brain is also really cool as far as, and we'll try to explain some of these mechanisms without getting overly technical here, but of what movement does in the brain. And the first is brain growth and plasticity, right? So exercise increases BDNF, which is a protein in the brain that supports learning, memory, and emotional regulation. So with BDNF, scientists use the analogy a lot that BDNF is essentially fertilizer for the brain. Just like fertilizer helps plants grow stronger, movement helps brain cells form stronger connections.
It's funny, when we first started reading about this, I'd never even heard of BDNF.
Right.
And I started reading about it, and it's interesting. And that's referred to in a lot of different places, fertilizer for the brain.
Right. Yeah, I love that analogy. Another thing movement can do is stress and inflammation regulation. So it reduces inflammatory signaling linked to depression and stress responses, and it helps regulate the body's stress system, right? So think of, another analogy here is think of movement like a pressure release valve for stress, right? And we've all felt this to some degree, whether it's a run or lifting weights or something, but when that stress builds up in the nervous system, movement can release that pressure. And then lastly is motivation and dopamine circuits. So exercise improves these motivation systems that are tied to effort and dopamine signaling. This is why people often feel more motivated after movement, right? And even if they didn't feel like doing anything at all before. So have you, Dave, and you're pretty consistent, I think you're really good at exercising and staying consistent, but have you ever started a workout without any motivation to do so, and then you end up feeling energized afterward?
Like every day? No, but there are lots of times where, you really don't feel it. But what I have learned is, I'll say it this way. I've never once finished exercising or a workout feeling worse. I mean, I might feel tired, I might feel exhausted, but I always feel better. Always. I mean, that's just 100%. And it's interesting because when we were doing research for this episode, I started to understand why. I thought it was more just, it was something hard that I knew was good for me that I didn't want to do, but I did it anyway. And that gives you a sense of accomplishment, and that's why I was feeling good. And I think that there's an element of that for sure, but that there's actually physiological reasons why my mood is improved after a workout. And so I think there's a little bit of both going on there. Mm-hmm. But no matter how bad I feel or how unmotivated I am at the beginning, I've never once finished exercising being like, man, I wish I wouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
So, anecdotally, it's been, for me in my own life, just a strong signal that there's something more going on than just feeling accomplishment. And I think that the good news is that there's multiple types of movement work. And I'll walk through a few examples. Walking is like one of the advantages. It's just the lowest barrier, so easy to do for almost everyone.
Yeah.
Improves mood. If you walk alone, it encourages reflection and creativity. It gives you that time to connect with yourself. If you walk socially, which is very easy to do, then you're creating connections with others. And so walking can kill so many different birds with one stone in terms of the mental fitness. The movement piece, which is going to have a physiological impact on your mood, whether you're connecting with yourself or connecting with others through walking. And another one is if you're walking outside and during daylight, that light exposure, which we've learned in recent episodes, improves your sleep drive, just having that daily light exposure. And if you walk right after a meal, that metabolic improvement. So there's a lot of ways walking can just really benefit. That's one. Obviously, resistance training, weight training, and this isn't for everyone, but weight training is really good. It builds confidence. It improves metabolic health. It reduces depression symptoms. And also what we recently learned is of all the forms of exercise, the one that earns you the most sleep drive, that improves sleep the most, is weight training. Then another one is yoga, sort of mindful movement. This is really good because it combines movement with breath regulation and sort of almost like a meditative type exercise. Really helpful for anxiety. A calming of the nervous system is yoga. And then cardio. Cardio is running, biking, swimming, anything where your heart rate is up. that has strong mood elevation, good stress release, increased energy and endurance. And so those are kind of just categorically the different types of movement and exercise and the different benefits. And different types of exercise seem to produce different mental effects, and different types of exercise are easier for people to incorporate into their lifestyle. And I know that you, Luke, you do a lot of exercise. You do particularly a lot of weight training, lifting.
Mm-hmm.
What have you noticed the difference between different forms of exercise? How does like lifting weights or cardio or other types of exercise affect you mentally?
Yeah. One of my personal opinions on this is I think different body types almost will excel at different areas of exercise, right? So like my build is just, I'm not saying I can't be a good runner, but I'm just like not meant for that, I don't think, right? So I think resistance training just like fits my build, and I'm not trying to be like some massive individual. It's just, I think what you said about sleep is actually one of the best outcomes from my resistance training. And like weightlifting is, I'm pretty structured about it now. I work out 6 days a week. And then on my rest day, I notice it's a little bit harder to just feel like exhausted and earn my sleep that night, if that makes sense. So I definitely see the benefits of weightlifting and with correlation to sleep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But you don't have to have crazy structured training, right? To see an effective dose. So let's talk about the minimum effective dose, right? So, because that common misconception is it has to be super crazy regimen or training to work, right? But benefits start far before that. Even the World Health Organization, they recommend, I think it was 150 to 300 minutes of moderate activity per week, right? Plus strength training twice weekly, right? I think a lot of people are not doing that, right?
So on the low end, that's like 30 minutes a day
Right.
or an hour 3 times a week.
Yeah. But the interesting thing is the research is that the mental state benefits, we're talking about movement as it relates to mental fitness, starts much earlier than what, WHO recommends there. So sometimes in just as little as 10 minutes of movement. So there's really 3 kind of practical lanes here. And I think all different levels of people that are just getting into exercise or don't do any, or some that are already into really structured training, right? You think of the beginner lane as a low barrier, like you said, it could be walking. Dave, as you said, is one of the types. 10 minutes per day of walking or light movement. That's enough for you to instantly start improving your mood and energy. And a good way to, couple that is after a meal, right? There's extra digestive benefits to that. So, if you can anchor it to certain times of the day, like just walking after lunch, get out, walk 10 minutes. That's a way to, beginner mode. You'll immediately start seeing mental fitness benefits. And then if you want to get a little more advanced, a solid routine is just to do 30 minutes, 3 to 5 times per week. And that's, roughly falls into the World Health Organization recommendation there, right? And then for someone that's more advanced and wants to stretch themselves, maybe they're doing really structured training. They're doing strength training plus cardio, which definitely, if you get to that level, has even more benefits as far as long-term resilience and performance improvements and confidence. So the key here is, no matter where you are in your fitness or exercise or health journey, you can start anywhere and start seeing the mental fitness benefits of exercise.
Yeah, I like that. I was actually thinking the walk, a 10-minute walk has so many benefits, especially if timed after a meal.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe ideally during daylight. So sometimes if it's after dinner, it might be sundown. But if you could do it after lunch, but that a walk is so beneficial for so many different ways. If it's done socially, you're connecting with loved ones. If it's done in solitary, then it's a great way to think of your thoughts. That even if you're already exercising on a regular basis, an hour every day, adding a 10-minute walk has so many mental health benefits. And so that I think that that phase one is not necessarily replaced when you go to more regular exercise. I just think the daily walk can be a habit that everyone incorporates. And maybe that's the baseline of your fitness, and maybe it's in addition to other fitness.
That's a great point. Because even if you're in this advanced tier, right, adding in walking, because walking is, if we look at last week's capacity episode, right, movement works like charging a battery. So it's like the acute capacity gain, right? So no matter what you're doing, a 10-minute walk can expand your capacity.
Yeah, I love it. Movement just improves areas people don't immediately associate with exercise. And we've talked some about this, but better sleep quality, improved emotional regulation, reduced rumination, where you're just ruminating over and over again of past traumas or disappointments, higher baseline energy, faster recovery from stress. So exercise improves sleep efficiency and helps people fall asleep faster. And then you have better sleep when you're in a regular exercise routine. And then all that has compounding mental health benefits.
Yeah. So maybe some quick reflection for us and the listeners here, just to think back of the last time you moved your body intentionally. Maybe it was just a walk, maybe it's lifting weights, maybe yoga. After you did this activity or movement, did you feel even slightly different? Maybe it was you felt a little calmer, more clear, less stuck, less brain fog, right? Most people can think back to some movement or exercise at some point and recall that shift, right? And that's the key idea here. Movement is one of the fastest ways to change your internal state on purpose. You're not waiting for motivation, you're essentially creating it.
All right, this show is all about mental fitness, and here's something most of us don't admit. Everyone has those moments when you feel overwhelmed, stuck, or unsure, and what's actually going on in your head. That's why we built New. New is a mental fitness platform designed to help you clear your thoughts, reflect, notice patterns, develop habits, and get support that fits who you are. It remembers your goals, your wins, the things you're working on, and helps you stay on track. Not therapy, not toxic positivity, just real support when you need it. If you want to be part of the early access group, head to talkwithnew.com. That's talkwithnue.com. Sign up now and get 3 months free. I was just thinking about my jog yesterday, and it was a classic example of when I started out, I was just like, why am I doing this? I have so much to do, and I just didn't feel like doing it. And it usually takes me about the first 10 minutes to kind of get past that. So, not always, but often in the first 10 minutes of my exercise, I'm still deciding if I'm going to keep going. But this was just yesterday, and then I'm like, of course I'm going to keep going, and I kept going, and then 20 minutes in, my thoughts were elsewhere, and I was just thinking about stuff, and all of a sudden I had this like moment where I was just feeling super happy. I was just clear thoughts, doing what I knew was good for me, and I don't know, it was a cool experience, and that's not necessarily how it is every single time. But like I said at the beginning, I've never felt worse after exercise. I mean, physically sometimes, yeah, sometimes you're physically spent and exhausted. But I've never felt like emotionally, I've never been more sad or down or more stressed or more anxious or more depressed or whatever it is. I've never felt more of those negative feelings after exercise.
Right.
So how do we measure progress? And I think it's important that we think about measuring it in the right way. When we think of exercise and fitness, the way we've typically measured things is weight loss, which is a really horrible way to measure success in exercise, or performance. If you're weightlifting, you might measure in like the amount you're lifting, or if you're running, the time it takes you to run a mile or whatever, or in your appearance. And those three things are kind of the main ones, like weight, performance, and appearance. Those are all benefits of exercise. But if we're thinking about our mental fitness, those are not measurements of progress. The way for mental fitness, the things we need to think about measuring is mood stability, reduced rumination, improved sleep, higher energy, faster recovery after stress, increased capacity, those types of things. And so why that's important, there's nothing wrong if losing weight is a goal, that you're measuring that as part of that goal. There's nothing wrong if you want to, get to that 7-minute mile or get to your 300 pounds on the bench press or whatever the goal is. Those are all good things. Or if you want to just look better, there's nothing wrong with those things. But when we're thinking about our mental health, that's not how we measure it. So you just really need to be reflective internally on how you're feeling, looking at things like sleep. Sleep is probably a really good objective measurement. When you start exercising, just, are you sleeping better? That's something that's very easy to measure and should, in most cases, be an almost immediate improvement when beginning or increasing your activity level.
Yeah, that's a good reframe. I think it's easy, especially like when you start going to the gym, it's easy to start comparing yourself and thinking about only measuring by weight, performance, and appearance. So as it relates to mental fitness, those are good measurements. Thank you, Dave. Speaking of mental fitness, movement strengthens all three mental fitness pillars: connection to self, connection to others, and understandably and obviously health and vitality. In connection to self, we've talked about mood and energy, right? So it creates this greater agency over your mood and energy. Connection to others, movement can be social and relational, right? Whether that's relationships at the gym or a jogging buddy, right? Or, swimming with a team, a walking group, right? So it can be very social and relational, but at the same time, that those connection to self benefits, improved mood and energy, will also impact your relationships with others and your connection with others.
So even if what you're saying there, Luke, is even if you're exercising by yourself, the derivative effects can improve your relationships because your energy level's better, your mood's better.
Exactly.
People like being around you more.
Yeah, no, exactly. And then, yes, of course, health and vitality, right? We've talked about all the research and science here. It improves brain and body resilience, and movement's one of the few interventions that improves multiple systems in your body simultaneously.
Yeah, I like that. I was just reflecting as you were talking about that. I think most of the time my exercise is alone, and it's a time for me to really just connect with myself. But when I am doing exercise with others, it's usually a sport that it can be walking. Like my wife and I go on evening walks a lot, and that has been amazing for our relationship and giving us time to talk about things. It's amazing. But also I just think of like playing basketball with friends or doing any sort of like sporting activity together with people. It's one of the best ways to connect with others. So yeah, it really has a strong impact on each of the three pillars of mental fitness. Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot here. I just keep coming back to this as we've discussed this, Luke. The daily walk. I almost want to put something up on the mental fitness resource about whether if you're not exercising at all in your life, or whether you're a regular exerciser, wherever you are, I feel like the daily walk, a 10-minute walk, ideally in sunlight after a meal, can do so much for our mental well-being, improve sleep, improve physical health. I just keep kind of coming back to that one thing. If we think of how to apply this, we've given lots of things that we can apply, but that just feels like something that everyone can do. And if you're not doing that, you could add 10 minutes a day and it could have a lot of impact.
Agreed.
Yeah. So Movement is really one of the only tools that affects your brain and body at the same time. You don't need perfection, but you need consistency. 10 minutes of movement is a mental fitness decision.
Thank you for everyone listening to this episode on movement for mental fitness. If you've enjoyed it, share it with, friend, family member, leave us a 5-star review, comment about what you liked. And thanks for listening to the Mental Fitness Podcast.